right. My name is Sue Downey, if I don't know you or you haven't been with us on any of the other webinars. And again, if you haven't, I would encourage you to check them out on YouTube. I am the education chair and also the diversity committee chair for the International Nanny Association. And I am pleased as punch to be here tonight and share this information with you with my friend Yvonne. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a minute, but I want to um, make sure to once again thank Adventure Nannies, which is a nanny agency. It places all across the United States. Here's Ruka. Um, Adventure Nannies places all over the United States, live in and live out positions, travel positions, and more traditional positions. Adventure Nannies was thrilled to be the sponsor for the diversity series. They do not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national or ethnic origin, ancestry, age, religion, or religious creed, disability or handicap, sex, gender identity and or expression, sexual orientation, military or veteran status, genetic information, or any other characteristic protected under applicable federal, state, or local law.
Okay.
Plus, they're just good people. So I
That's a
love that
lot.
they have that all on their page right up front.
Mhm.
They believe in diversity, they believe it makes us stronger, and they also have amazing jobs and are amazing people to work with. So if you're ever looking for a position or you want to partner with a great agency, check out Adventure Nannies and stop by their Facebook or Instagram and thank them for their sponsorship of our diversity series.
Mhm.
This is the end again of our series. They're all up on YouTube, free for anyone, free to share with your nannies or families. They've been on different topics, and tonight this is the perfect topic to end with. So I'm gonna pass it over to my friend Yvonne and let her introduce herself and
Okay.
lens and take us away.
All right. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sue. And let me just, oh, can I share? It says
Oh
it.
yeah, I'll let you. Sorry.
1 second, please.
I
It's so hard to tell if people are paying attention.
know. Just look at me. I'll keep my camera on and try to
Right.
like look engaged the whole time.
I'm talking
Oh,
to a dark room.
it's okay. We love you, people in the dark.
All
Here we
right.
go. And more people are coming in, so
Perfect. Okay.
excellent.
All right. So I just want to make sure that you can see my PowerPoint. Can you see my
I can
PowerPoint?
see it. Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So let me just, okay, make sure everything is situated on my screen properly. I'm looking. All right. Perfect. All right. Good afternoon and good evening. I know that some people may be joining us from the West Coast, but it is evening here in Brooklyn, New York. And I want to welcome you all to Ally versus Accomplice. How can I use my privilege to enact lasting change? Now, I am Yvonne Davenport Perkins of Lens Diversity, and today's webinar is really the start of a necessary conversation about allyship, some terms that are associated with it, and the term accomplice as well, that has kind of changed in the general lexicon due to recent events in pop culture, but also in the news and mainstream media. And so I really want to start having a conversation to make the distinction between these two terms. Um, Now, before we jump into our presentation, I do want to give you a little background information about myself and my business partner and Lens Diversity. So we have humble beginnings. Now, Lens was founded by myself and Rupa Curate in July of 2020. So we're both serial entrepreneurs, and Lens is just one of our many business ventures. So Ruka is the founder of Tiny Treasures Nanny Agency, and it's actually a domestic household staffing firm that was established in 2016 after the birth of her daughter Chloe. But she's also the founder of Our Day Circle, which is a web app that helps you raise funds toward your wedding that was established last year. And when she told me that idea, I was like, that's actually an awesome idea to have people help, pay for your wedding instead of buying you a toaster or a blender that you don't need. And she's also a board member of INA. She was a nanny for 14 years. And of course, as I said before, she is mom to Chloe, who is 4. Now, I am a personal development and life design coach, and I launched Life Code in 2018, essentially helping my clients define success on their own terms and help them to create actionable steps and learning how to make a life, what I like to call HTML because of the whole coding aspect. But I also had worked in the diversity and inclusion consulting industry for 10 years. And Ruka and I kind of came together and had this great idea for Lens. I'm also the mother to Christian, who is 8, Tyler, who's 5, and Owen, who is 1. So if you hear random yelling occasionally in the background, it's just my children. Don't worry, they're playing, but there's no way that I can mute them. So unfortunately, they're part of this maybe. I wanted to also say that Lens was created in response to the culmination of 2020. So there were so many things that happened last year, both personally and just, for everyone. The COVID-19 pandemic, the shutdown, the impending presidential election, police brutality, joblessness. So there's so many things going on. And Ruka and I really asked ourselves a question, and we thought, how can we be better citizens to the world and promote a more authentic and deep conversation about our differences? And so Lens was born. Now, Lens's mission is to promote anti racism advocacy and social justice using the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, like I said, we want to provide that safe space for people to have difficult conversations across difference. Now, often people are introduced to these concepts, DE and I, through their work. So they may have to attend a seminar or, mandatory training, every year. But we really wanted to change the narrative from a business imperative to a human imperative, because it's not just about our work environment, it's about our personal relationships with the people in our family, in our friend circles, in our communities, in our churches. And so we want to make sure that we provide that education and that resource for individuals who may not work for an organization that has this idea at their heart, or they may be self-employed but still want to stay educated and up on the times. And so this is why Lens was really created to answer to that need. Now, you all may be thinking, lens, it sounds like a cool name. You're seeing through your lens, and everyone has a different one, kind of like a camera, but it's also an acronym. And when we created this company, we thought about, what do you need in order to promote anti racism advocacy and social justice? Like, what would you need to do? And the first thing you need to do, of course, basically is learn. So educate yourself, look into making substantial changes. And you can't really make any substantial changes without learning more information that can cause like a paradigm shift or a change in your mindset. So first things first, let's learn what we don't know. Then we want to empathize. We want to hear the stories of people in our lives, their experiences, how they experience the world, how they're treated, and not respond with, well, not all, or, but also, but just say, I hear you, I see you, and I'm here for you. So that empathy is a big part of it. Next, we want to normalize these conversations. As I said before, sometimes you may be introduced to these concepts through work, and we want to make sure that it's not just a business imperative, that a company isn't, taking these matters to heart because of their bottom line, but also that people are taking these matters to heart because it affects their relationships with the people in their lives. And then finally, we want to talk about support. We want to support the people who are already working to advance these causes, and also support other people of color in naming their pain and telling their stories and really shifting the narrative to help get equity for all. Now, I know you're going to hear this word a lot as in this webinar, and it's conversation. So we're always in conversation, and there's an importance of difficult conversations. Historically, I am non-confrontational, and I do not like, or I did not, I should say, did not like having difficult conversations. But I realized that if there's a discomfort around a topic, it's one that needs to be explored. It's one that needs some clarity. And so keeping that in mind, just knowing that once there's that discomfort there, you can have the conversation to kind of peel the layers back and see where that apprehension is coming from and where you can learn more. So, that uncomfortable feeling, of course, is an indication, but we also want to understand, or also want to be mindful of the fact that not everyone wants to have these difficult conversations. So, we offer an anonymous space for people to submit their responses, their thoughts, their feelings, their questions, and you'll actually see that in action. And when we discuss scenarios a little bit later on in the webinar, we're using a software called Mentimeter that allows you to give us your responses in real time anonymously. You'll just need to log into a website and enter a code. And I'll go through this again once we get up to the discussion questions. But we also want to have an engaging, enriching conversation. And we know that sometimes it's not as so much apprehension when we know that it's anonymous, that we could just say what we need to say, and then get clarity on, why some things should be changed or be different. So a couple of ground rules before we jump in. And I do want to just take a note on self-awareness. I love this definition because it's basically highlighting the fact that the self-assessment is probably the most important thing in making that movement forward. As I said before, we want to learn, but before we can learn, we need to kind of assess where we are. So what do we believe? What are our prejudices? What are our preconceived notions? What are our biases? And then how can we make changes to actually alter our worldview, to see that maybe what we learned isn't the true way or how things work, but then to figure out how they actually work. And so self-awareness is one of the most important things that we can actually implement all along this journey, because it's the first step in making any substantial changes in our lives. Now, a couple of guidelines before we jump in. As I said before, I want you all to be present. I know it is late. As I said, it's 8:30 here in Brooklyn, but I'm going to keep this very quick, compact, but I want to give you very good information, and I want to make sure that you're present and you're participating in the seminar, in the scenario discussions. So just make sure you're here and you're participating with me. Also want you to be yourself. Any questions that you have, comments, please feel free to submit in the chat. You can submit anonymously through Mentimeter, but there are many different ways that you can kind of get your message over to us. And then we can also unpack that and speak about it as well. I also want you to listen to your fellow participants. If there's anyone that wants to speak up in the question and answer session following the webinar, let them speak their piece and listen to their experiences and what they have to say, and just let them have the floor. We also want to assume good intent. I'm not sure. I only know two other people in this webinar today, but I don't know whether we all know each other. And so in thinking about that, I don't want you to assume that maybe somebody meant something with ill intent, or that they were being sarcastic or negative. If you have a question for someone, or if you need clarification, you can always message us anonymously through the chat function. Also, you can message me directly or through Mentimeter, and just let us know your thoughts and feelings on specific things, and we can always speak to that. And then finally, we want to be open to different points of view. So we're all coming at this information from different areas in our life. I'm very familiar with the terms ally and accomplice and all this, the information that goes in the science and the studies that go into that. But there may be some people who've never heard of this term accomplice in this context. And so we just want to be mindful of the fact that we're all coming at this from a different area, and that we're all learning to try and get up to the same page. So our agenda for today is very simple. We're going to talk about allyship 101. What is an ally? What an ally is, what an ally is not, the different types of allyship. And then we want to talk about becoming an accomplice. How can we make that bridge from being an ally to being an accomplice? As I said before, we're going to have some scenarios for discussion so that you guys can kind of give me your feedback on what you think, how you would respond to specific situations. And I'm really excited to see how that plays out. And then we're going to talk about a call to action, what we can do going forward to actually use our privilege to enact lasting change. So now that I've gotten all of the formalities out of the way, let's dive in. Okay, so allyship 101. What does it mean to be an ally? Pretty fair question. And basically there are two definitions. So the dictionary definition is very simple, and it's uniting oneself with another to promote a common interest. Now, I know that I was actually introduced to the word ally, well, when I remember, so when we were talking about World War I and World War II and the Allies. But then in the DEI world, that definition has actually changed. And now it is a person from a dominant or majority group that's working towards ending oppression for those in marginalized or oppressed groups. And so this is a very big distinction that we need to make between the two definitions in order to move forward. So an ally has existing privilege that they can use to leverage in interactions to help support and advocate for oppressed groups. So they're always asking that question, how can my existing privilege be leveraged to support others? Now, in the context of this conversation, we mostly focus on race, but you have to understand also that privilege exists outside of that. So we're talking about, socioeconomic background, educational background, physical ability for disabled individuals. If we're talking about gender identity, there are a lot of different ways that we can exercise privilege as a part of the norm versus the other. Another thing is that allyship is a process. So you don't get an award, you do your ally work and you're done. It's a never-ending process. And like this image here, there's going to be mess in the middle. It's going to be sometimes 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, or sometimes you have to retrace your steps, or you go forward, but then you have to regroup and bring some more people. So it's really a convoluted road, and it can be a little overwhelming at times, but it is always something that is worth the effort. So it is a process, and we just have to become accustomed to the messy middle, much like life. And then also, allyship cannot be used to virtue signal. So you may sometimes encounter people who say, well, I'm an ally because I do X, Y, and Z. Oftentimes, being an ally is not necessarily things that you can make visual or be public. There are things that you're going to do behind the scenes that don't necessarily have to be shared with anyone in order for you to know that you're doing the right thing. And that's the most important question. Are you doing these things because other people can see you doing them, or because you know they're the right things for helping others? So there are a couple of terms in the world of allyship that I wanted to clarify, because I think that's key for having these constructive conversations. And the first one is a marginalized group. So that's a community that experiences discrimination or exclusion, and that can be based on, social, political, cultural differences, different dimensions. And then we also want to talk about privilege, which is, the right or a benefit that's enjoyed by a specific group of people that's really beyond the advantages of most. And then we've got the power, the ability or official capacity to exercise control in any given situation. So traditionally, a marginalized group is not afforded the privilege and therefore cannot exercise their power to enact the lasting change. And so that's why allies need to join in helping make those changes. So, what is performative allyship? Now, some people may be familiar with this term, and essentially, a performative ally is someone who identifies themselves as an ally and says they're, down for the cause, but is really only in times that are convenient, or they position the conversation in such a way that can be detrimental to the group that they claim to support. And I found this very useful mind map here that kind of gives an idea of how performative allyship shows up. And I just want to unpack a few of them here. So the optics, what people see us doing. So there may have been some organizations last summer in the wake of, George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, that made certain promises to their, constituents, their clients, their customers, but haven't necessarily enacted any structural changes in their organization. They did it for the optics, right? Centering yourself, especially if you're not part of the oppressed group that you're supporting, but you're telling your story because it's somewhat related to the topic and how it affected you, that still makes you the center of the problem where you are not the center. You can also become resentful. There are some people who, if they're asked additional questions about, what they believe, what they've done, and they get, very defensive or maybe a little bit hostile. Also, virtue signaling, as we said before, you're showing your receipts. I did this, I did that, and it's not necessarily a who did what and who's got more checks on their list, but who's actually doing the work without worrying about whether they'd be recognized for it or not. And then finally, the everyone's doing it, so I have to, and the bandwagoning, because it's a popular thing. Like back in June when people posted black squares in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, but then there were a lot of those people who never really spoke on the issue again. It was just something that everyone did at the time, but didn't really think to the future as to how they would then take that a step further. So we actually created an image that's called the iceberg of allyship to really get this down specifically. And when you think about an iceberg, it's 10%, maybe 15% is visible above the waterline. But below the waterline, that's where the most of the iceberg lies, that 85 to 90%. And so it's the same way with allyship. On the top, you've got the performative ally, the person that is, concerned with optics, that centers themselves, that is really not about the group or the cause. They're about the person, me, I. And then you've got the ally, the person who understands that they have privilege that they can leverage to then enact change for others. But maybe, they're just doing things here and there, but there's no specific course of action that they're following to make changes. And then you've got the deepest part of the iceberg, that's the accomplice. So some of you may be asking, well, all right, well, how do you define accomplice? We've already talked about performative and the regular allies. What does an accomplice look like? So what does it mean to be an accomplice? Now, an accomplice has traditionally been defined as, being an abetance to a crime. So helping someone commit a crime. But to be honest, a lot of the things that are legal now, 50, 75, 100 years ago, were illegal. And so, in that, the fight for civil rights and social justice, those people were accomplices because they were fighting for the equity for others, not necessarily paying attention to what was legal, but what was right. And so, an accomplice is that same thing. We're fighting for what's right, not what's for what's legal or illegal. Now, the ally is going to be a noun, it's a person. But in the context of this conversation, accomplice is in a verb. It's someone that requires action. They're always in action. So they go beyond the donations to organizations, beyond sharing posts on social media, beyond comforting a coworker that has been, demeaned or harassed because of their sexual orientation or their gender or their racial ethnicity, right? Being an accomplice is more. It's, they tick all the ally boxes. They're unpacking their own biases, they're using their privilege to help, but they're also in action. So they're working on themselves, but they're also in their communities, in their workplaces, in their churches, in their neighborhoods, and they're talking, they're spreading the gospel, for lack of a better term. And they're working in their communities, in their workplaces, like I said, having the hard conversations. A lot of times accomplices will have strained relationships with family members behind the causes that they believe in, or maybe they'll lose friendships behind it because one person thought they felt one way and then they find out that it's something completely different. But they understand that their sphere of influence is such that it can really create some structural changes for people. And so they understand that there has to be some skin in the game, right? They have to be sacrificing something because the marginalized groups are the ones that are affected most by this. An accomplice is going to be something that's optional, but they're also trying to help. They're working toward that and they're constantly educating themselves. Now, to further drive this idea home, when you think about an ally is more for a group of people, right? For a cause. But an accomplice looks at the structure. So when you talk about systemic racism, how it works in, in the prison system or the pipeline from schools to prisons, they're looking at the structures and they're trying to figure out ways that they can change that. So yes, of course, we're focusing on helping the people, but we also want to work on changing the structure so that the people are no longer affected by these, these ideas and these policies that have perpetuated the oppression of these groups. Now, I actually found a very quick clip that kind of sums up the ally versus accomplice argument by Austin Channing Brown. Now, she is a speaker and a writer, and she's focused on racial justice in America. And she wrote, "I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness." And this is actually taken from the Together live stage in fall of 2019, where she talks about being an ally versus being an accomplice. So let's take a look.
The language that has been popularized over the last few decades is, what does it mean to be an ally? Black women are starting to use the phrase accomplice. You could call yourself an ally and pat yourself on the back and probably feel really good about yourself. Or you could hop in the car next to me and decide to break some rules, decide to go where I'm going, and say, you know what? You go to jail, I'm going to jail. That is what it means to be an accomplice. It means to be all in. It means every risk that you are going to assume, I assume too. I'm not going to leave you out there. I'm not going to leave you by yourself. I'm in it with you, day 1 to day 100. I'm not leaving.
Okay. So there's a very powerful, very short clip that just lets you know that being an accomplice, like she said, is being all in. You're dedicated. You're not going to back out. You're holding yourself accountable, but you're also holding your people accountable as well. When we say get your people, that's what we mean. You are also speaking to the people in your circles to let them know this is not right. And here's what we need to do in order to make these changes. So now let's look at the scenarios for discussion. So as I mentioned before, we're using a platform called Mentimeter. And what you're going to do is, whether you're using your phone or your laptop, if you go to www.mentimeter.com, what you will do is enter the code that's at the top of the slide that has the response question, and you'll just enter whatever comes to mind. You're not limited by the number of responses. So if you have one and then you think of something else, please feel free to let us know as much as you want. But we're going to read out the discussion questions, and then we're going to invite you to give us your responses anonymously. So no, nothing is taboo. We won't know what you said, what you didn't say, but let us know. Let's just leave it all out on the floor. So the first discussion question: you are at a family dinner celebrating your brother's birthday. The conversation turns to your cousin who recently came out and is dating a woman. Your father comments that he doesn't understand why these gays have to be so in your face about their sexuality. An uncomfortable silence follows, and your mother quickly changes the subject. How do you respond? Now, again, you go to www.menti.com. I'm sorry, I said Mentimeter. It's menti.com, and use the code to enter your answers to this question. I'll give you a little bit of time because I know getting access to the portal may be a little bit dodgy at first, but hopefully for the next two questions, we'll be a little bit quicker with our responses.
Hi, this is Emily. Is it possible to have the question reposted?
Oh, sure. I'm so sorry. Here, I'll just put it on the screen so you could see it.
Perfect.
Is that better?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Perfect. All right. So let's see. I'm going to just go over to the other side to see if any of the answers have populated. Ah, okay. Okay. So I actually, as more answers are coming in, and please let me know if you need me to put the question back on the screen again. But I do just want to respond to some of the answers that we've gotten here. And I really appreciate that sometimes in that situation, it's hard to do anything. I often feel like I won't change anyone's mind. So I'm just quiet. And I completely get that, especially when you're in family and maybe you're seeing people that you don't really see on a regular basis. Like if it's a Thanksgiving dinner or Easter Sunday or it's Christmas, those type of events, you can kind of just say, oh, I'll gloss it over. I don't really see this person a lot. But when you think about the people in your life and also the effect that they have on others in their lives, so their coworkers, their friends, like that you don't see every day, sometimes it does make a difference just to say something to push back on it, because oftentimes we let those family members, especially if they're older, they're set in their ways. We're not really going to fight that fight, but sometimes it's necessary to push back. And I know that it's not always the easiest thing to do. And that's why I like this, that Mentimeter is anonymous, so that you can say the real things. Like, I may not say anything because I just feel like it won't make a difference. I don't want to start an argument. But sometimes people need to have arguments. Sometimes people need to have real, honest discussions and kind of let the chips fall where they may. All right, so I'll give a couple more seconds, but these are good, right? So, that's not being an accomplice, right? Don't say that it's biased, right? Biased against, the LGBTQ plus community. So let's move on to the next question, or the next scenario rather. So you are at a play date with a few other nannies. The conversation turns to one of the children who identifies as non-binary and is referred to as they, them. Another nanny comments saying, "That's ridiculous. You can either be a boy or a girl." How do you respond? So I'm going to bring up the information for Mentimeter first, and then I'll go back to the question or the discussion scenario in just a second, so you guys can get that code. Okay, I'm going to go back to the scenario discussion real quick.
Hi, would you be able to put the code back again, please?
Sure.
I just missed that.
That's okay. No worries. There you go.
Thank you.
Mhm. All right, I'll give a few more seconds. I just want to see if we get a couple responses here. Okay, well, I'm going to assume that you all are writing me very detailed responses and they just haven't made its way through to me yet. But one of the ways that I think I would respond to the issue is to ask the woman, just, flat out, have you ever had an experience with someone who identified as non-binary? And what is the, I guess, the difficulty for you in acknowledging this child as they, them, instead of as he, she, or he, she. So I think that's part of the question, is really just starting to have the conversation. Where does the discomfort lie? And then maybe she might, she could get defensive, but she might say, you know what, because that was frowned upon in my family. My family doesn't believe in XYZ, or I don't believe in that for my children. But then it starts a necessary discussion around why we believe what we believe and who we learned it from, because oftentimes we have beliefs in our heads that aren't even from us. They're from our parents, they're from our teachers, they're sometimes from our employers, different things that just swirl around, and we latch onto something that kind of gives us, something to hold on to, like an anchor. And in this instance, that could be an anchor as well.
Yvonne, I'm going to just ask this question because maybe other people are thinking it. But in situations like that, when you're with
Mm-hmm.
a small group of people,
Mm-hmm.
I'm always I'm always worried about addressing it. Like, do I address it in the moment
Mm-hmm.
where I feel like, you should address those things like right when they happen?
Mm-hmm.
Or, but then sometimes I feel like it puts people on a defensive. And so
Right.
then, or is it better, do you think, to like wait and try to talk about it later? I
Well,
don't know.
I think depending on the relationship. So in this relationship, I think that the nanny is someone that you probably interact with on a somewhat regular basis. And so in that instance, it could be something that you bring up with them on the side. So not necessarily like, in your face, like, why would you say that? Because like I said, we don't want to start an argument, but having the conversation is important. And I actually just checked the chat and see that Sarah said, I would say that to change it is not their place to try and change their identity with their bias. And so that's also a good offering. That's the child's identity. And what I would basically boil it down to is that it doesn't hurt anyone to identify this child as what they would like to be identified as, right? And leave it at that. So we don't necessarily have to devolve it into a conversation around like, what are your beliefs and why do you believe that, unless this is someone you're speaking to one on one. But if in mixed company, just to say, that is how this child identifies, and it's not hurting anyone for them to identify as that, is also an issue. Okay, so now I'm hearing that the mentee might be off. It worked for the first question, but not the second one. Well, let's cross our fingers for the third. If you enter something in the mentee and it doesn't come through, my apologies, but please enter it in the chat. I'm going to go to the third discussion question, and that is, at a children's birthday party, your employer introduces you to another mom. As you make small talk about parenting, you mention that your daughter just turned 2 and how funny she is. The mom comments, that sounds wonderful. Have you considered adding another child to your family? Your employer laughs and comments, oh, she can't have any more children. She's so vital to our team, and maternity leave takes her away for too long. How do you respond? So let's put that code up and cross our fingers that it is working. Oh, perfect. And the Menti code is also in the chat for those of you that may need it. I'm just going to go back to the question for those of you that just want to like look it over as you put your answers up. Amy, I love your background. It's like you're an astronaut. All right, let's go to Menti and see if it's working. Okay. So it looks like it's working. I hope so. No worries, Kara. No worries. I understand. Children come first, especially in the evenings. Join us again if you can. But yeah, that comment upsets me. How dare you monitor my uterus, especially if the mom herself is a working mom. Here's the question again, Aaron, if you need to look at it. All right, I'm gonna go back and see if we got some more responses. Oh wow, okay. So that's a conversation and decision between my partner and I. We can discuss this more in depth later. Right. Lucky for mom, boss, I'm not planning to have another child for a while, but accidents always happen. Being a mother does not take away from my value as an employee. That is very important. I have actually experienced a scenario very similar to this one at one of my previous jobs where my employer made a very similar comment, but also happened to be a working mother. So it was just like the insult to the injury was just that you were also a working mom and then telling me that I can't go on maternity leave. So it's just, but it's thinking about how mothers are looked at in the workplace, and especially with COVID, how they've really had an exodus from the workplace because they're expected to do the work but also take care of the kids at the same time. And now that they're at home, there's no separation, and so it's hard for women to now navigate the workplace when they have nowhere else to go. If you're working from home, work is here, but then also school is here, and also the kids are here, and so it's very difficult for a lot of women in the workplace. Another, I think I'd laugh it off, but have a discussion with my employer after the fact. Sorry about that. To explain why it upset me. And I would say we haven't decided when yet, but it's definitely something we will decide on. Our family planning takes precedence. And I can't see the rest of it, unfortunately. But yes, and a lot of nannies have a hard time finding work as moms. They feel we are not flexible and it's not fair. So that's also something that we need to consider in how we respond to certain situations. All right. And now the final question for Mentimeter looks like it's working again. Based on what we've discussed today, how do you think an ally would respond versus an accomplice in these scenarios? So now just thinking about like what we've learned. So like an ally is for people, accomplices for structures. I know that in some of these scenarios, the structure may be a little bit difficult to attack, but let's just try and think outside of the box and use the code to say, as an ally, I would respond X, which could have been any of the responses that you put on previous slides, but then to try and put yourself in a different frame of mind to say, as an accomplice, how would I address these scenarios? So I'll give you an example to kind of get the ball rolling. In the instance of the nanny making a comment about the child who is non-binary, maybe if this is a group of nannies that you meet with on a regular basis, you can host a conversation around non-binary children so that we can understand, why these children are making these decisions, where they're coming from, why they've made, like, at such a young age, like what is the impetus behind it, really having the discussion and gaining more knowledge. Remember, learning is one of the biggest steps to making those changes in the paradigm shift or changing your mindset. And so maybe hosting a talk about that very topic so that people can be like, oh, you know what? I never looked at it from that perspective. It actually makes sense to me now. So maybe that's how an accomplice might address that scenario. So I'll let you all go, see what you come up with. right, I'm gonna give a couple, like 50, I'll give you like 45 more seconds just to get some answers in. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to discuss our call to action. And if anyone has any questions, I would love to answer them. Okay, that is a good recommendation, Sarah. Thank you very much. I'm gonna try that. Okay. Oh, and I got more answers to the second scenario. That's perfect. All right, let's see if that works. Ah, look at that, Sarah. You're a great addition to my team. Thank you so much. All right. So I think an ally would be standing up for the person in the moment, but the accomplice goes further to work on and educate what really happened in the situation. Right. So, kind of speaking to hosting a panel discussion or just giving people additional information that they may not have had. An ally would perhaps call out the behavior, but an accomplice would try to educate why the behavior was wrong and setting the path for change. And I think with all of these scenarios is having a conversation, helping to give exposure to the topics in a way that can be included in the everyday chats. And this is and good. And I also appreciate someone said this is hard. I don't know how to answer that question. And that's okay too. We're not supposed to have all the answers. And that's one of the great things about these discussions, and especially Mentimeter, is throwing everything up there and then being able to actually look at other people's answers and say, oh, that actually makes sense. Maybe I'll use that going forward. Right. So it gives us the information that we need to make little changes in our own lives. I would say I would hate for anyone to not feel like they had to be fake. I want them to be whomever they want to be, love whomever they want to love. Right. Ally, I would be more concerned with saying the right thing and demonstrating how the other person is wrong. Accomplice, I would focus on, unfortunately, it is cutting me off, so I cannot read it in full. But I do appreciate the number of responses for this one. Just out of curiosity, I want to see if maybe the other one came up. No, it didn't. Oh, look, and it came up after the fact. Well, there it is. All right. All right, but let's move forward because I don't want to hold you all past time. So let's move on to a call to action. So this is going to be the area where we're going to look at support. So, like the acronym LENS stands for, we've learned the information about what it is to be an ally, what it is to be a performative ally, what it is to be an accomplice. And we've heard some real life stories and heard some scenarios where you could be an ally, where you could be an accomplice. And then we've normalized the conversation by having it. You all being here today is just a testament to that. So now we're going to talk about the support. So the next question is, well, how can I be an ally? So there are 6 ways that we think you can be an ally. So doing your own research, educating yourself instead of placing the burden on people from marginalized groups. And I do want to take a second to just highlight here that when speaking with individuals from these groups about resources or recommendations, you're going to get varied responses. So as a woman of color, there have been many people that have reached out to me to ask specific questions. And, I'm very open. I have no issue with, answering specific questions and really like kind of parsing through why people feel a specific way if they're trying to figure out something else. But there are other women of color that do not want to have that conversation. They say, Google is your friend. And both answers are correct. So when you have a request and you receive a very specific kind of, distrusting, negative response, think about what you've asked and whether there's a different way that you can get the information that you need. So is there like a curriculum that you could purchase from a person of color that kind of amplifies their voice, but also gets the information in a way where you're not asking specific questions? There's workbooks, there's online courses that you can take, free challenges that you can join, anti-racism challenges that are free for 30 days. So like there are so many things on the internet that you can actually engage in that are from people in these marginalized groups, but don't necessarily have you asking a specific person one question after another. So you just have to be mindful of that. Second, we want you to acknowledge your privilege and your power. So have open conversations about that and really think through like how you can use your privilege and your power to leverage that change for the people from these oppressed groups. Now, you also want to examine your biases. You want to be willing to hold that mirror up and really ask yourself, am I engaging in behaviors that perpetuate the inequity that I say that I'm against, because like I said, some of these things can be unconscious. They can be embedded in our brains so much that we don't even understand why we're doing what we do. So the fourth thing is we want people to listen more and speak less. As I said before, listening to people from marginalized groups and hearing their stories, finding out about their lived experiences and what they've gone through that can be very different to what you've experienced or what can also help to inform and change your perspective on a specific topic. Offer support when it is needed and requested. So this is another thing I think that a lot of people from marginalized groups have run into, is they've had some people reach out very well meaning that say they want to help, they want to support, and then when that topic is not really in the conversation anymore, or it's not in the news, they kind of disappear. And so we've been burned before. There have been people that have reached out to say, I'm all in, I want to do this, and then it's just it kind of doesn't work out that way. So we want people to offer their support when it's needed, but also when it's requested. We want people to put skin in the game and then also hold themselves accountable to doing what they said that they were going to do. And then finally, we want you to prepare yourself. So you want to be prepared for difficult feelings that may arise on both sides. So you may be speaking to people that, become very hostile or defensive, but you may also become hostile and defensive. Try and give yourself some grace and think about why that is. And, don't give yourself a hard time. If you feel like you've made a mistake, there's always ways that you can make changes for a better effort in the future. But the most important thing is to keep forward momentum, right? So it's progress over perfection. So you're not just focusing on, I've got to get this right. I don't want to offend anyone. This is cancel culture. We do have to be mindful of that, unfortunately, but also, being willing to fail forward. If you find someone that is a good resource, lean on them and see if you can get support and also give support in return. So now it's, how can I make the move from ally to accomplice? Okay. So that's actually we try to make it a very simple 3-step process. So the first one is to spread the word, right? So asking questions about your current policies that may hinder marginalized groups at work. So this is very specific. So for those of you that are self-employed who don't necessarily have a workplace, you won't really be able to ask about, specific marginalized groups or policies. But for those of you that do, you want to ask those questions. But also, as a second point to that, talking to people in your communities, in your families, in your churches, in your neighborhoods about these issues, having these open conversations and understanding why they think the way they do. And also, for lack of a better term, like spreading the gospel. So you're here to tell everyone about this one concept that you're supporting, and you want to let them know why they should support it as well. And obviously, these conversations can get a little bit overwhelming at times because of the amount of people that you have to talk to. But like I said before, it's about maintaining that forward momentum. Then we want you to get involved. So identify charities and nonprofit organizations that align with your beliefs and also support the marginalized groups that you are in support of. And then volunteer and offer your services. But then in line with that, supporting people, but also amplifying the marginalized voices. So as I said before, not centering the experience on yourself, especially if you're not a part of that group, but then also taking the stories of others and sharing it with people that may not have seen it in such a specific way. So, some people who say, oh, I didn't know that, Black people got pulled over so much by the cops and why that might happen. If you start sharing more of these stories, then you're like, oh my gosh, this is not like a one-time thing. This happens all the time. And not just with Black people, it happens with all people of color. So there are some instances where you can share stories and help people realize that this is a real issue that they can then find out more about and help support people that are affected by it. And then participating in activities that need your voice and your resources for support. So like I said before, events, protests, discussions, panels, anything that you could be a part of that you can lend your voice to help in galvanizing a group of people toward a specific end. So I have one more Mentimeter question for the night, and it is, what is one thing you want to start, stop, or continue after attending this webinar? So when you put in your answers to this query, you could put start, colon, and then, type whatever. And remember, you can put in as many answers as you want. So if you have one for all three, just remember there are only so many that I can read on the slide before it cuts them off. But please, I will be able to look at these after the webinar is over. So please feel free to enter as many responses as you'd like. This is all good feedback for us when we kind of tweak this webinar and make it into something better. Ah. I'm going to refresh in just a second. Let's see. All right. Okay, here we go. All right, so now it has finally refreshed for me. Thank you so much. All right, becoming an accomplice in the workplace, especially as a nanny of color. I want to be better at speaking up. Yes, and that's a very important but small step, but it's still just as important as all the other steps. Just speaking up and being able to respond in the moment to specific situations is a hurdle for a lot of people, and it was a big hurdle for me as well. So that was one of the things that I was very happy to check off of my list when I was getting better at speaking up in the moment and not going after the fact like, oh, I should have said this. Uh, we love that INA does this. It's so important. There's just a lot I do not know. I want to be a better ally slash accomplice. And I'm actually glad that you've put that for those of you that want to explore this concept and this conversation further. We are developing online courses that we will have available through our website. So I encourage you all to go visit our website. It's lensdiversity.com to sign up for email updates, because when those things go live, you will be the first to know about them, so that you can sign up and access and, you know, figure out how to be a better ally and accomplice. And that will work. Continue the work of cultivating a nanny community that is open to these discussions and change while being supportive and cognizant of marginalized groups. Right. Start being an accomplice and putting skin in the game. Continue seeking further perspectives and education. Keep listening. So these are all great things. Awesome. Make my allyship more actionable by being consistent with reading, donating, and showing up. These are all really great things to do. And one of the things that I love to highlight, especially at the beginning or the end of any webinar, is really like a quote that kind of sums up everything. And this is something that we have here, that we said, moving from ally to accomplice requires leveraging your existing privilege and influence to not only offer support to marginalized groups, but also to dismantle the oppressive systems that have historically held the other at a disadvantage. Being an accomplice requires direct action to facilitate healing and provide equity for all. So, on that note, I am just under time, so that's perfect. I want to thank you all. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar and the information that you've learned. I'm going to paste a link in the chat. It is a SurveyMonkey link that will allow you to access the 3-question feedback survey that we want to provide or get feedback on, obviously, from all of our people and all of our participants today. We also have an infographic that recaps all that we discussed today. So please, again, head over to www.lensdiversity.com, sign up for the email updates. We will send that infographic over to you to make sure you have all this information. And also follow us on social media, because we're here, we're having the conversations. We do a weekly highlight called Dear Lens, where people submit anonymous questions that we answer. We're going to start doing them on our podcast and also live. So whatever questions you have, no question is a stupid question. Please submit your questions to us, and we will answer them either on social media or live in our podcast, one of three ways. But I do want to thank you all again for being with us today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them either in the chat or unmute yourself.
And thank you, Yvonne. I appreciate so much you and Ruka and this great information, and I'm getting all these thank yous, and I want to thank everybody for coming. This isn't easy to talk about at the end of the day, as we said, and it speaks volumes to me to see people here, both INA members and not, and know that that we are committed to trying to have more conversations about this kind of thing in the nanny community. If you're interested in helping get those conversations rolling, one thing you might consider is, if you're a member of INA, being on the diversity committee. You can join us, and we're doing our best to try to not only do these webinars, but sort of move the conversation in this direction more and more. So if you're interested in that, reach out to me directly, or to Ruka, or to anyone on the board. We'd love to have you. It's not a huge commitment of time, and it's definitely something you could do. See how I just turned that into a little commercial for
That's perfect though. It's perfect. You gotta sell it. You gotta be selling.
It's true. Well, we all never know what to do. So, but yeah. So if you're interested in information about that, we'd love to have you. Thanks so much for coming tonight. Remember that you can share this with your networks, share it with your groups, share it with, if you're an agency, with your nannies, and direct them to the YouTube page where they can watch anytime. And thank you so much, Yvonne.
Of course.
I can't wait to think of more things to have you come back.
We're here. We're ready. We're ready.
Thank you so
we can
much.
do a part two. We can do a part two. Who knows?
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.
Okay. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
This
for
is wonderful.
I like that people come on at the end, and
I know they come on at the end. Now we're like, oh, there you are.